chair the meeting, but I know you've not come to hear me. I know you've come to hear Professor Sitta and see his presentation, so I won't stand in the way of his presentation for more than just a couple of minutes. But I just want to say, since this is a big occasion, the launch of the Atlas, the Palestine Atlas, that it's a very, very important moment. On Sunday we will be marking one of the greatest tragedies in our national history. In the first day of the Battle of the Somme, 60,000 British people were killed just between the morning and 1 o'clock. That was a terrible tragedy, and we believe we must never forget that. We make sure we remember it by every Remembrance Sunday. We wear poppies. We played the last post. I'll be playing the last post in my local church on Sunday, and we have 2-minute silence. Well, in just the same way, Palestinians must never forget what happened to their country. And never forgetting means writing down, capturing all the facts, putting them into an atlas. And this is not just of interest to cartographers, this is of interest to every Palestinian, I'm sure, but also to the whole world, because it records an injustice, not a momentary injustice, not a momentary tragedy, but one that was played out over 30 years by the time we got to 1967, and by half a century by the time we got to now. And it's a tragedy that is, of course, still continuing. This book takes us up to, this atlas takes us up to 1966. There is an atlas of the occupation years coming, I'm sure, and I look forward to that as well. But as Professor Sitta says, it is much better recorded now. He's trying to recapture a time when there are few records. My wife and I spent a month in the West Bank this summer, and I just want to mention 2 little incidents from that that I think explain to anyone who doesn't understand why geography is so important in this conflict. One was driving up from Jerusalem to Nazareth on the big motorway, and driving past Qalqilia and Tulkarm, huge, big Palestinian towns, and seeing on the road signs there's absolutely no mention of them. Driving around the West Bank as well, past large Palestinian cities, and seeing signposts marked to a small Israeli settlement. This is the way in which even today the Israelis are in denial about the existence of Palestinians. They try not to mention them in their road signs. They try not to allow motorists to find the way there. Another incident that didn't happen to us, but we had it reported to us by a journalist we know who works in Jerusalem. Went to interview the mayor of one of the settlements right inside the West Bank, and had heard that many of the people living in the settlements were totally oblivious about all the Palestinian villages around them, as though they didn't exist. So he tried it out on the mayor's secretary. He pointed through the window and he said, "Can you tell me the name of that Palestinian village over there?" Expecting her to say, "Well, I don't know the name of the village." She didn't say that. She said, "What village?" Everybody could see the village there. She had just blanked it out of her consciousness. She didn't even see the village. And sadly, that is too true of the Israeli attitude to Palestinians as a whole. They want to be in complete denial about the existence of Palestinians wherever they can. And our defense against that is people like Professor Sitta, who will record the real truth in the atlases that he produces. And that is not just a great academic achievement. Professor Sitta was a professor in Western Ontario and has a distinguished academic career behind him, but it's also a matter, a political statement of the highest order. So, without further ado, I will hand over to Professor Sitta, who's going to do his presentation, which you'll see on the screen. Thank you.
Is it working? Yeah, right. Thank you very much, Mr. Mark Linton, for your kind words. Also thanks to Palestinian Retail Center and its director, Mr. Majid Azir, for organizing this event at fairly short notice. And thanks to you all for braving the weather on Friday night to come here. That's why I say quality is more important than quantity. You must have read in history books the story of the king who conquered faraway lands and brought back riches, and he immortalized his deeds by carving them on a stone monument. Then the next king came afterwards, and he chipped off his name and put his name instead and claimed to be the victor. This forgery and deception are still going on today, only with more sophisticated means. Now, we don't have stone monuments anymore, but we do have charts and maps. The map is long considered to be the birth certificate of a place. It's also the identity card of its owner. In the last 2 centuries, maps became an instrument of colonial power to show the extent of the conquest of this power, and it was equivalent to planting a flag on a faraway land and claiming its territory to belong to the holders of this flag. So in the late 19th century, the British Empire could boast vast dominions by showing it painted pink color over 3/4 of the world map. But nowhere in the world has maps been instrumental in the conquest of a territory than in Palestine. In the 19th century, Palestine was blessed and probably sometimes cursed by so many travelers, priests, surveyors, spies, and adventurers who charted this holy land. A particularly remarkable effort in that century was the work of Palestine Exploration Fund, in which they conducted a full survey of Palestine for 4 years starting from 1871. The result of this survey was embodied in 26 sheets and 10 big volumes about Palestine, showing 12,000 place names. Although its purpose was basically to verify the authenticity of the Bible, and it had little interest in the living people of Palestine. Very little was mentioned about them. All this mapping was vital for General Allenby when he started to conquer Palestine in 1917. But 2 years later, that is in 1919, the Zionists, promoting the myth that Palestine is a land without people, presented the Versailles Peace Conference in 1919 a map of Palestine hatched all over 1,000 villages so they will not be seen, and marked with the words, "Grazing for nomads." They wanted to convince the peace conference that Palestine is a nomad place with grazing only. That was their first brazen forgery, but of course more were to come. As you know, this month ushers 93 years of death and destruction and destitution of people of Palestine following Balfour Declaration, the promise of those who do not own to those who do not have title. Yet while Allenby was fighting in Palestine, while he was not finishing conquering Palestine, Haim Weizmann, on behalf of the new Zionist movement, pressured Britain to survey every acre in Palestine. His objective was clearly to identify the ownership of every acre in Palestine so that they can get hold of anything which is doubtful or possible for colonization. The British complied, and the survey of Palestine was established, which provided us unintentionally or intentionally with a wealth of information about Palestine. But contrary to Zionist aims, it did not show that Palestine is a land without people, but it is a land full of people who lived in there for thousands of years. And therefore Palestine survey is our main ingredient of the atlas we have made. But colonial powers, influenced by Zionist pressure, carved out the boundaries of Palestine to isolate it from the Arab East so that it can be handed as a gift to the Zionists. And their surveyors went around Palestine, plotting, marking, and dividing lands. All these boundaries of Palestine were delineated without the knowledge, let alone the consent, of the people of the land. And they have suddenly, these people, found themselves cut off from their relatives, from their water, from their fields, from their livelihood, by a border created and guarded by foreigners. And then we come, of course, to the colonial powers who tried to create spheres of influence in Palestine, to utilize natural sources and build military bases. However, none of these colonial powers intended to dispossess Palestinians or expel them from their homes. But Zionism did. It has three objectives. First, to occupy and confiscate the land of Palestine. Two, to expel its population and dispossess them. Three, which is very rarely mentioned, to erase their memory, their record, and their trace, as if they have been a speck in the dust of history. The third objective, as you may agree, received little attention. It was primarily carried out through maps and through re-edited historical books and propaganda films. It was a continuation of the military war to conquer Palestine by other means. It should not, therefore, be surprising to anyone to notice that Ben Gurion, in the very same week in which he signed the last armistice agreement with Syria in 1949, this very same week, he formed a committee of geographers, historians, surveyors, theologians, and officers with the objective of erasing all Palestinian names, erasing them completely. I say Palestinian names who could be Arab names, could be Islamic names, could be Byzantine names, could be Roman names, could be pagan names, but these were all Palestinian names. The objective was to erase them completely and to put a Hebraic alternative to these names. The Atlas of Palestine, published this month, as you know outside here, is an attempt to restore the history and geography that was meant to be erased. In this presentation, we can go through this unusual and unique experience of dispossession and obliteration of people's existence. The following maps I'm going to show you are all taken from the Atlas. The first one is the map or the territory which Allenby found when he started to conquer Palestine in October 1917. As you see, it's a country with variable terrain, fertile coastal plain, cultivated mountains in the middle, and a Ghor deep below sea level. It's a home of the Palestinians for several millennia. And these people lived in this land, and they have enough to live with. First, they have wells. These are the wells spread all over the place. They have also springs. These are the springs. And they have other water resources which kept them alive, in which they worked their fields and lived peacefully for many years. Obviously, as you can agree, that was not a grazing land for nomads. And after 30 years of British mandate, Jewish population increased from 9% of the population to 30% under the aegis of the British mandate, which allowed Jewish immigration to Palestine. But when we come to see which Palestine Allenby came to occupy, during that mandate period, Zionists managed to acquire land under the British mandate to this extent. This is their land during the British mandate until 1947. It did not exceed 5 to 6% of Palestine. And at the end of the mandate, the partition plan was proposed by the United Nations. This proposal was endorsed by the UN under severe US and Zionist pressure. This is the partition plan. As you can see, it is absolutely different and much larger than the Jewish land. They were offered the sovereignty, not the ownership, and not the expelling the people, the sovereignty over 55% of Palestine, which is 11 times the area they owned during the mandate. And not only that, But suddenly, 457,000 villages in the area allocated for Jewish state were Palestinian villages, and they composed half the population of this new state. Those 457 Palestinian villages found themselves suddenly under the sovereignty of immigrants who just arrived to the country. But of course, Zionists were not satisfied with that. They have occupied much more land than that, and 78% of Palestine was occupied, and as a result of that, 675 towns and villages were depopulated. How did they depopulate them? They depopulate them in stages. And these stages, as you can see, starting from the little they had in the coastal line, they started in several 30 military operations to cover the whole period till they reached the level of 78%. Needless to say, after 1967, they occupied the West Bank and nothing is left of it today to the Palestinians. But if we examine the anatomy of al-Nakba, we really learn lots of things. For example, let us examine the anatomy of al-Nakba, how did it take place. And the first, until the 15th of May 1948, when the State of Israel was established, 222 Palestinian villages were expelled. Expelled. Why should they be expelled? At that point, no Arab soldiers ever entered Palestine, and only people defended themselves by very simple and primitive means. Here the Zionists had a force in the end of the 1948, reached 110,000 well-armed and trained soldiers, many of them joined in the Second World War. So Ben Gurion here, this is highly significant, I think, expelled the population of 222 villages. Why did he do that? These were the people who were to be his citizens, Arab citizens. So he started the first stages of what we know now as the ethnic cleansing of Palestine before anybody came to rescue the Palestinians. And regrettably, while the British were there, who were supposed to protect the civilians from expulsion from their homes. And then after that, they started, or continued actually, to expel Palestinians. If you notice in this diagram, there are flat lines showing no expulsion of people. Nobody left. Nobody became a refugee in these periods. What are these periods? These are the periods of the truce. During the truce, the yellow line, nobody left because people stuck to their homes and they were not forced to leave. If they were not forced to leave, they did not leave. But when they left under the force of 30 military operations shown in blue here. All these military operations you see are military operations which have been the main reason for expelling the people. So the idea that the refugees left on their own accord is of course a myth. And the refugees, if they really wanted to leave, in the quiet period of the truce, they could have packed their things and left. But nobody during the truce left, as you can see. And only during the military operations, people were forced to leave by lots of means. One of them, of course, is massacres. If you look at the incidence of massacres and compare them with the military operation in this period, you find that each military operation has been started or initiated or instigated by a massacre. A total of 77 we have recorded, not counting, of course, atrocities. But here, this, I think, shows you very clearly the whole history of al-Nakba, that massacres were instrument of ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing started before the British left and before any Arab soldiers come to help Palestinians, and that shows you the pattern which is continuous until today. If you examine the location of these massacres, you can see that they are mostly in the corridor between Jaffa and Jerusalem, and in the coastal plain from Jaffa to Haifa. Of course, Galilee has suffered a great deal of these massacres. So, in a brief way, this is what the situation remained, as it remained. almost 1,000 Palestinian villages. They were living in their place, shown by the red dots. Then Nakba came and they were expelled. And suddenly you see this map is empty of its people. Life has been extinguished from 670 ethnically cleansed towns and villages. And where did they go? They were in exile in what was left in Palestine and in the West Bank and in the adjacent Arab countries. And the method, of course, of expulsion was not accidental at all, as the historian Benny Morris says. It was all planned even before the establishment of the State of Israel. The pattern is very clear. They would surround the village from these sides. They commit massacres and atrocities. They bombed, of course, the village before, and then they let them go, close them from three sides, and let one side open for them to flee. This side was open to the south, in the south of the country, towards Gaza and even to Jordan. In the middle, it's open to the east, and in the north, it's open to Syria and Lebanon. Now, this question of occupying 78% of Palestine was not again an accident which happened in 1948 and 49. This process is still continuing on today. I can give you several examples. For example, the armistice line is supposed to indicate the line at which the opposing forces were located at the moment of the armistice. It did not give any right to any party. It did not deny any right to any party. It was simply a line defining the position of the forces. Therefore, the armistice line is not a border. And the countries which consider Israel to be within the armistice line, the so-called wrongly green line, is not a border. It's not recognized except by some countries which accept that as a de facto line. Now, take the case of Gaza, for example. The armistice agreement for Gaza is shown by the red line here. It's shown by coordinates, recorded in the United Nations. Nobody can deny that. But then, 1 year later, in 1950, the Israelis coerced the Egyptians during King Farouk time, saying that we have a problem with the border, let us create a new border called modus vivendi. And they signed an agreement, a secret one, not published, in February 1950, called modus vivendi agreement. And this agreement bites into Gaza Strip and stealing 200 kilometers out of it. So the area which we see in red now is stolen from Gaza Strip after the armistice agreement was signed. So not only that, this process has happened in central Palestine. The position of the Israeli forces at the moment of armistice with Jordan is shown by this black line. And they, Israelis, Moshe Dayan in particular, coerced King Abdullah, told him, if you do not give me a slice of the West Bank, I will take over all the West Bank. So, in the middle of the night, the agreement was signed that they will give you a slice of Palestine, and this is the slice of Palestine which have they taken. We call it the Muthallaf. The area of this sliced part of the West Bank is equal to the area of Gaza Strip, all of it. But to the misfortune of the Israelis, one of the people who live in that portion taken over by Israel is Ra'id Salah, who defends the Aqsa Mosque. So they did not have a nice citizen to live with them. And this situation was repeated again in how the armistice line around Jerusalem was created. Moshe Dayan, which was agreed to have this green line, and this green line would have saved the lands of Walaja, Batir, and Beit Safafa and Sharafa from the clutches of Israel. Again, they pressured the Jordanians, and they finally agreed to a line which gives them more of the territory. And not only that, this territory will include the railway line from Jerusalem to Jaffa. Therefore, the hatched area in blue is taken over also by this method. And this process of biting into Palestinian land, of course, in the end, it ended by the dissection and dismemberment of 111 Palestinian villages in Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. 111 villages, as you see, one part of them in blue falls into Israel, and the other part, which is red, falls in the West Bank. Now, the tragedy, human tragedy for the population of these villages is immense, because their houses would be in one corner, and their drinking water and wells and so on in another corner. Their mosque or church in one place, and the rest in another place. I remember in 1960, the BBC showed a film by John Kennedy, very moving film, showing a funeral in Beit Safafa when people were walking behind in the procession of the funeral, both on both sides of the barbed wire of Beit Safafa, because they were dissected. They were united in death, but they were divided by geography. And this situation actually did not stop. Of course, I don't need to remind you of the West Bank, but take the case of the Jordan-Israel peace treaty. This red line to the left is the old mandate boundary of Palestine. Then, when they agreed with Jordan, they agreed on a new line in which Israel will bite into Jordan and take this blue area. They call it exchange of land. But not only that, this map, which I'm going to show you I'm showing you now, is not published neither in Israel nor in Jordan. Moreover, the Israelis got a slice of land within Jordan territory, which is the blue area, and from which they withdraw water from 12 wells up to the value of 10 million cubic meters per year within the sovereign territory of Jordan. So the process of biting into the land is continuous. The question of Taba, for example, is very well known to you, and they won it by arbitration. It's only a sliver of land, very small. The boundary with Syria and Lebanon is still in dispute. But one question which comes to mind, when they expelled all the Palestinians in 1948, what did Ben Gurion have? He has 93% of the state he called Israel belongs to Palestinians. It's now empty. Empty. So what would he do? Of course, he would rush to the European Jews to come to Palestine to populate this empty land. They wouldn't go. Most of them preferred to go to the United States. Then he found his prey in the Arab Jews. So they brought him to live. But this took some years. Now, in the immediate aftermath of the expulsion of Palestinians, what happened? There was a great frenzy of looting. These are not my words. These are the words of the Jewish writer Moshe Simrensky. Frenzy of looting. The Jews who live near Arab areas, they went into Arab homes, they found a hot meal in the kitchen, a toy, child's toy in the ground, unmade bed, and they took everything in the house. They actually not only took everything which they can carry, they ripped the windows, and they ripped the doors, and they ripped the tiles, and took them away. So the first group of looters are the Jews who live in nearby neighborhood to the Arabs. The second group of looters were the army officers. After they finished the victorious task of expelling the unarmed farmers, they turned their trucks and tanks and went back to the town, and they loaded their trucks with the loot from the Arab homes. In battalion number 5, according to the diary of Ben Gurion, they went back to Lidda and loaded 1,800 trucks from Lidda alone. And the second group of looters were the high-ranking members of the Mapai. They vied for the choice houses in Jerusalem, nice villas from stone, and everybody was, claiming one of these houses between them. The businessmen in Haifa formed a committee to divide between them the Palestinian stores and workshop and so on. This is for you, this is for me, and this continued like that. But the biggest looter ever is the Jewish National Fund and the Jewish Agency. They took over the land after this frenzy of looting, and of course the Jewish National Fund, as you know, has 55 offices around the world, mostly in Western Europe and America, and is registered as tax-exempt charity. Of course, one of the board members here in England was Tony Blair, and they of course supervised that situation. I mean, they condoned that situation. Let me come back to the landscape of Palestine after the first wave of looting. What did they do with after that? They actually destroyed the villages in these strips. First, they destroyed all the villages between Jaffa and Jerusalem. Why? We will have foreign visitors, they say, and it will be embarrassing to see the rubble of the Palestinian villages on the road. So let us remove them out of sight from the road on the highway between Jerusalem and Jaffa or Tel Aviv. The second one, for the same reason, is the coastal highway between Tel Aviv and Haifa. They wanted to remove that. In Nazareth, from Tiberias, they had also the same purpose, but because there was a fear that the Arabs may return there, and around Gaza Strip and the south. And the following step of clearing the land are these yellow areas. Again, as you can see, they are always bordering the armistice line in case the Arabs will decide. But then someone thought, but Palestine is a holy land, and it has rich history. If you clear any layer of the land in Palestine, you find rich history. So why do we destroy these villages without thinking? We have to think. And then they decided maybe we can find artifacts or archaeological monuments which will create for us a Jewish history supported by artifacts, by stones, by monuments, by things like that. So what they did, the soldiers went out of the scene and came the Israeli academics on the scene. They established what's called the Israel Archaeological Survey Team, and this survey team was given a list of the villages to be destroyed, and they say, you have 2 weeks, go there, find out if we find something of interest to us, and the rest we will destroy it. So this society, these are the maps of the society, started work in the 60s, and they went around to all the villages, examined the village, photographed it, charted it, and then decided to destroy it if there is nothing of interest. What is nothing of interest? Any monument or any artifact belonging to Palestine. Whatever it is, Arab, Islamic, Byzantine, Roman, pagan, if there is something which can be vaguely referred to the Jewish history, they will keep it. As a result, then, after this survey, they decided to destroy all the other unwanted villages in this manner. So not only this is a matter of occupation of a land, it's also destruction of human heritage, which is very regrettable, and I'm sure it will go down in the annals of history as being a very, I'll find a word for it. But not only that, they did something else. Let me remind you that Palestine, again, is a land of great history. And for many, many centuries, it was documented, of course, before in simple manners. But we have a man called Eusebius, Philippo Eusebius. He was Bishop of Caesarea in the year 313. He charted the towns of Palestine, their names and their location with each other and so on. And this document was kept for many centuries in Greek and Latin. Luckily, the Palestine Exploration Society here in London translated it about 5-6 years ago. So we have access to that now. When we examined that document of 300 years AD, we can find at least 139 villages which kept the same name like 1948. Al-Rama is Rama, Bethlehem is Bethlehem, and so on. 139 villages which have been known to exist and to be inhabited since the Jesus Christ. And then that great record of humanity was destroyed by Israel. These are the villages which are known, there are probably more, but there we have found that are known to be in existence from the Christian era, has been destroyed by Israel. There are towns and villages, there are places which are called khirbits. Khirbit means an old ruin. Now, I think this is great crime for about the destruction of the history of humanity. These are the villages which have been destroyed. I give you just one more example of that. You know, the city of Tiberias, named after the Emperor Tiberius. It is an old... Now we come back to the big looter, the Jewish National Front. What did they do? They started, of course, by confiscating 2.5 million dunams. And this is the land they have confiscated in the first 2 years of 1948 up to 1950. What did they do with them? They, of course, made them a buffer against the return of the refugees, and then they built parks on them. These are parks either by Jewish National Fund or by National Park Authority. And these parks serve two purposes. Wonderful, very great use of one function here. The first one is that they honored all the Western politicians who aided the destruction of Palestine, like Balfour, like many Western leaders. They call it Balfour Forest. And they honored them. I don't know if the word honored is the right one, but they honored them by giving the names to these Western leaders. But the second purpose, which was extremely important, they concealed the graves and the debris of the destroyed villages. If you walk around that, it's not accessible easily, but if you look around, you may find ruins and stones thrown about. So these parts were intended to conceal that. Now, as a result of this looting and expulsion and destruction of the land of Palestine, what happened to the Palestinians themselves? There are today 11 million people, but 88% of them are still within Palestine itself and within a narrow ring around it with a width of about 150 miles. It's clear that after all these years, the Palestinians are not going to go away. They are not going to disappear. Naturally scattered in Syria and Lebanon. We can also do the opposite. We can look at any refugee camp anywhere and see where they come from, so that we know where to return them. And then, of course, the question was asked: but if they come back, then there will be no place for them. All the sites are now destroyed and things are built over them. This is not true. They are destroyed, yes, but the construction is not a problem. Every place in the world has new construction. Take Amman, for example, it grew from about 300,000 people. Is the Israeli expansion today? And we can see that 90% of village sites are still vacant. 96 and 90%. In precise terms, I have 15 of them fall in the middle of the new Israeli expansion, and 22 are near such expansion, but all the rest are entirely clear and ready for the construction. But we have further culture, and many of them drifted back to the city to pursue their traditional occupations in trade and commerce. But the vast majority of Israel area is taken over by the army. They have 55 airports. They have several dozen depots of weapons of mass destruction. They have training fields, factories, and so on. This land, mostly, more than 3/4 of Israel today, is under the control of the army. And therefore, Israel is really like a huge military base with people there playing the part of people. But in fact, it is, of course, when peace comes, we don't need this military base whatsoever. But moreover, we said, let us examine the theoretical situation in which the refugees will return. When they return, what will they find in front of them? Who will be living there in the land which belongs to them or near it or whatever? We classified 1,300 Israeli towns and villages as they are registered in the official register. When I say Israeli, I just use the word Israeli. And mass destruction, they have training fields, factories, and so on. This land, mostly, more than 3/4 of Israel today, is under the control of the army. And therefore, Israel is really like a huge military base with people there playing the part of people. But in fact, it is, of course, when peace comes, we don't need this military base whatsoever. But moreover, we said, let us examine the theoretical situation in which the refugees will return. When they return, what will they find in front of them? Who will be living there in the land which belongs to them or near it or whatever? We classified 1,300 Israeli towns and villages as they are registered in the official register. When I say Israeli, I just use the word Israeli. And this, we categorize them in 5 categories. The first category is the Ashkenazi Jews who came before 1948, who actually established the state of Israel. The second group is Arab Jews who came to populate the country. The third group is Jews who came after 1967 to benefit from the bonanza of the newly occupied land. The fourth group is Russian Jews who came in the 1990s. And of course, the fifth are the Palestinians who remained in their countries. You see the description here of the 5 categories is shown to be clearly for every village. In the middle of Galilee, of course, is very obvious to everyone, it is mostly Palestinian. But if you now say, where are the people who were expelled from the northern district of Palestine? They are naturally refugees in Syria and Lebanon, Ain al-Hilwa, the Yarmouk, and so on. Now, let us get them back. We know who they are, we know where they live, let's get them back. And we now bring them back from the 5 areas of UNRWA, and you can see they can come back to their separated families. They don't interfere with anyone, they don't crowd anybody, except of course Acre will be bigger and Haifa will be bigger, that's all. But the location of their villages are still vacant, and so they can actually rebuild their houses in the old position without any bother to anybody. Now we can repeat the same exercise in the southern district. And the southern district is even much less of a problem because all the Jews there are mostly located in 3 originally Palestinian towns, namely Beersheba, Asqalan, and Ashdod. And there are, of course, few kibbutz and few what's called development towns. But all the rural Jews, other than those shown, in the whole southern half of Palestine or Israel, rural Jews are less in population than 1 refugee camp in Gaza. Their total number is 73,000 people, which are almost half the population of Jabalia camp. So if we have exchange of population, if we reverse this process, people go back home and the new settlers go back into refugee camps, they will hardly fill 1 refugee camp. So from this angle, we have no problem whatsoever. But I would like just to end up with 2 observations created from the Atlas. The first observation is this one. This is a record, a part of record, of 40,000 place names mentioned in the atlas. We have an index of 40,000 place names mentioned in the atlas. So actually, when you come to think of it, we don't need to refute the Zionist myth that Palestine is a land without people. We don't even need to scour libraries in Europe and America to find land deed to prove the Palestinians have been there. All what we need is to turn to the Palestinians themselves. They have carved themselves over the ages without pretension, without plan, and without permission from anybody. They created the vocabulary of their social history. Over the years, they carved these names, and this is the vocabulary of their social history. This massive record, created by the life of the people for thousands of years, is now immortalized in these 40,000 names. We classified these 40,000 names in three categories. The first one is 1,500 names of human settlements like towns, villages, hamlets, and so on. The second one is 16,000 names of religious and historical sites such as mosques, churches, maqams, shrines, and so on. And then the third one is 30,000 place names covering almost every acre in Palestine. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to remind you, especially those who study the history of Palestine, that most of the studies which have taken place about Palestine have been concerned only with less than 1,000 names of the 40,000, namely the names of towns and villages, because they related to history, they related to the Bible, they related to other things. But nobody actually examined in great detail the other 39,000 names. Of these 39,000 names, we have names which indicate that people lived in that place. There are 120 names starting with the prefix Beit. Beit in Arabic means a house, something building like that. Also Beit of so-and-so, Beit the Johnsons, Beit of Abdullahs, it's really Beit so-and-so. So Beit Lahem and Beit Safafa and other places are taken like that. There is also another name which is repeated 51 times from Kafr. Kafr is the location of a clan, the place of the clan. And then we have 2,500 names with the word Khirbet. Khirbet could be an existing habitable place now, or it was habitable, but still recognizable. Marj. They also indicate the wells from which people drink, wells, springs, and ponds. They also indicate the trades of people in that area. For example, pottery factory, or grapes press, or wind and water mill, tahuna. They indicate the background of the farmer in this area, whether he's Akkawi, Ghazawi, Durzi, Nasrani, and so on. They indicate also the relative location of the village next to another village. They call it upper, lower, in between, tahta, fawqa, like Awr al-Fawqa, tahta, or Zuq al-Tahtani, or baina, in between. They also indicate special events of the people in that land. The horse's birthplace, the killing site of the chief, the hanging site, the battle scene. They also indicate strange names which have some kind of significance to people at the time, like a place called Going Up and Down, Tala Nazil. Another place called the Good Name, Tayyibat al-Ism. Another place called Good Morning, Sabah al-Khair. Another place called the Morning Star, the Najmat al-Subh. And the place called Shield Protector, Hami Qurso. And the place called Wolf's Face, Wajh al-Deeb. Another place called Dug's Tail, Dam al-Kalb. All these 40,000 names have names of people, created by people, for people recognition and use. It was their life etched in their use and speech. That is exactly, ladies and gentlemen, what Ben-Gurion wanted to destroy. And that is what this atlas tries to defeat him on this purpose. And therefore, if he is alive, or if he could know about this, he would turn his grave if he knew that all such heritage that he wanted to erase was now stored. And now, what did he want to replace it with in his adventure of erasing the Eastern Palestinian? This committee he formed it's called, they formed something called the Israeli Gazette. Israeli Gazette is available, you can buy it, and it's a document showing the place names in Israel. Now, these names which he included officially in replacement of 40,000 Palestinian names has only 6,800 names. What happened to the missing 30,000 and 33,000 names? First of all, his names are 6,800, are of course Israeli settlement names. Names created, carved out of the Bible, or created to look like Hebrew, like Ain Ghazal is called Ain Ghazal, translated into Hebrew, and Bir Adid in the south, called Bir Adid, and so on. And so these fabricated names, they did not manage to do more than 6,800 in place of our 40,000 names. Why is that? The reason is very simple, gentlemen. They don't have social history of the land. They didn't live in the land such that they describe life in terms of the land itself. They don't have Cohen Field. Cohen lives in apartment 18, Bengoni Street number 6. So there is no relation to the land, no relation to the life of the land, and therefore this history is of the Palestinians is alien to these newcomers, but it is not alien to the Palestinians who are the true owners of the land. One more thing I'd like to show you, and then I'll conclude. As you know, I'm sure you hear Bengorians say the old will die and the young will forget. Well, the old did die, of course, but not before they passed the message to their children. They told them about their village and their fields and their children, and the children did carry that message. But one of the good things about British Mandate is that we have a record, we have records. One of the records we have, the British, when they left in a hurry, unfortunately, unceremoniously, leaving the chaos and Palestine under the hand of the Jews, they took aerial survey of Palestine. And the last 2 years before they left, they took 5,000 aerial photographs of Palestine. Luckily, we managed to obtain them, and we strung them together in a carpet of landscape. We wanted to know, to show the young man, like my grandson sitting there, what his land is. His father and grandfather told him, son, we have fields, we have grapes, we have figs, and so on. So the young boy listened, and very nice. But then he may forget or not forget. We wanted to record that in the atlas, but also we want to take the son with his father on a trip. We are going to hire a helicopter and fly over Palestine and show the son and the grandson and the father his land. This record, of course, will never be erased forever, even though the grandson dies. This is a helicopter flying over Dimra, which is now Eretz. Now it turns around to show you Deir Sneid, and we'll turn now to the right to see another village. This is what the Zionists say, a land without people. Here are the villages you see, and the fields and so on. Here's Beit Jirja. Anyone from Beit Jirja here? And then there are roads here, and the fields, planted fields. Barbara is in the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, the Algeria. Here is your village, Algeria. And if you turn the helicopter to the left, we'll see something else. We can, by the way, create something like that for all of Palestine. And then here we have Na'lin, which is, there's Na'lin North also, and Khilbat Qasas. And then up to the top of this picture, Al-Jura, which is the birthplace of Sheikh Ahmed Yassin. So here we have then the memory of people, and the determination to keep it is kept by technology and defeating, of course, Ben-Gurion and the likes of him. I started with the story of the defaced monuments. But now we realize the thief, the robber, and the unjust. I'm sure that truth will shine again and justice will prevail. Personally, as a believer in the human spirit, which refuses to surrender or die and accept evil deeds, I'm sure the Palestinians will surely win and achieve the most basic human rights, namely to return home. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Abu Sitta. Those of us who believe that the Palestinians have suffered terrible injustice and illegality have just had put into our hands the best possible argument, one could say the best possible armament in the shape of Professor Abu Sitta's atlas, because it shows clearly what nobody can deny, much as the Israelis may try to deny it, the facts of what was there before. Now, we're going to have time for questions. We have this room, I believe, until 9 o'clock. And before I call for questions from the floor, I'd just like to thank the people who set up tonight's launch, particularly the Palestine Return Centre. We've got Dr. Shukri here and Majed Al-Aziz and many other people from the Palestine Return Centre and the Centre for European-Palestinian the Council for European-Palestinian Relations, and also Labour Friends of Palestine, which is represented not just by myself, but by our chairman, Andrew Slaunton, Member of Parliament, who's here, and also by Tom sitting further back. So I'd like to thank both organisations for bringing you this meeting, but most of all, Professor Abu Sitta for his wonderful presentation. Now, can we have some, can you raise your hands if you've got a question, and we'll take 3 questions, and I'm sure Professor Abu Sitta will be happy to deal with them. But one over here, do we need the, can we hand the roving mic round so everybody can hear the question properly?
I believe there's a recorded history now done by the Islamic University in Gaza as well. So would that be attached in CDs, for instance, to this atlas?
Can we have 2 or 3 more questions? Dr. Shukri?
Professor Salman, thank you very much for this professional, excellent work. My question is, we hear these days that Netanyahu is asking or is demanding the Palestinians to acknowledge the Jewishness of Israel. How would that, if that to happen, would affect the rights of the Palestinians and especially the refugees? Thank you.
About the continuity of the Zionist project, there is no doubt whatsoever. Ben-Gurion in 1939 told Paula, his wife, saying, we will accept any partition of Palestine, but then we will make an army which is strong enough to take Amman and Damascus and Cairo. The scheme they followed depended on the situation. During the mandate, they were given everything they could squeeze the British to do. And after that, when they actually found the British coming out of the Second World War, very tired and very weak, they jumped to the lap of the United States, they changed, and the first thing they have done to the British in recognition of their services is to kill their officers and to hang their soldiers in trees and to take hostages their judges. And therefore they turned to the military side to do this war after that, 1948. And in the period from 1948 to 1967, there were several wars, of course, 1956, 1973, and 1967, of course, and of course, lots of raids for the same purpose. Now, with this, the same scheme is going on, but under the pretense of Oslo Agreement, or actually using the gaps in Oslo Agreement to advance the situation of Zionism. People say sometimes why the Israelis are so keen in dividing the negotiation skills into 6, 7 files. You see, the boundaries, the water, the refugees, the security, and so on. The aim of that is really to tell the world that the international law is not valid for the West Bank, that it is not an occupied territory, that the Israelis have as much right in the West Bank as the Palestinians, and there is no occupation whatsoever. There are two people who are competing about a piece of cake. We are just now, let us divide this cake between us. Give me a bit more land, I give you a bit more water, and if you advance the line like here, the aim of this is to deny the existence of international law, which says that the West Bank and Gaza are occupied territory. There is one way to do it, to get out of the occupied territory and go back to where the international law tells you. And one of the interesting things we discovered recently, I'm working on this with Ilan Pape, is that we found that in 1942, the Haganah created something called the village files. They, in 1942, they would go to each village and ask about the people, who the mayor is or the head Mukhtar, and what they own, and how much water they have, and how much debt they are they in need of money, and do they have arms, and so on. And I was wondering, why did they do that? We have now copies, it's in Hebrew. And why did they do that? I think they were planning to take over Palestine, assuming the British would remain, by another means. So what I'm saying is, Zionism has one objective and has a multitude of tools, and it will continue to do that until Zionism is erased. Without erasing of Zionism, there can be no peace. The lady in the back said they have a place here and there. The problem really is, if you cannot live with people, you will always exclude them and they will exclude you. But if you decide to live as a human being, then in that case, human being can live in peace. I always say, why doesn't a Jew in Tel Aviv, why doesn't a Jew in Tel Aviv live like a Jew in London? He enjoys his practice of his social life, or religious life, and democratic life. Why doesn't Jew in Tel Aviv doesn't live like a Jew in Washington, where he can run the Congress? Why should you exclude the people you came to be guests in them and then you throw them out? So dividing the land, as you have said, is just another trick of reclaiming, like dividing the negotiation to 6 files, just another way of reclaiming the land to say that I have a right and you have a right, and we are just haggling over whose right is more than the other. And again, I repeat, and believe me, ladies and gentlemen, I say this after maybe 30, 40 years of working on this, first as a refugee, of course, but then as a matter of research. There is no way peace can come to the Middle East with Zionism. Zionism, no peace, war and war and war. No Zionism, tomorrow we'll have peace. Thank you.
Can I make a quick announcement? If you'd like to hear Professor Abu Sitta again, he'll be joining us on the 15th for our conference, the ongoing Nakba. That's part of our Palestine Memorial Week, which runs from the 15th of January to the 22nd. Sorry, Brunei Gallery. So visit our website, it's in Brunei Gallery, which is in South.
Okay, any other announcements? Well, it remains for me to thank again the organisers of tonight's event, the Palestine Return Centre and Labour Friends of Palestine, but most of all to thank for a magnificent presentation and for an invaluable document, an invaluable atlas, Professor Abu Sitta. To Nazareth on the big motorway. And driving past Qalqilia and Tulkarm, huge, big Palestinian towns, and seeing on the roadsides there's absolutely no mention of them. Driving around the West Bank as well, past large Palestinian cities, and seeing signposts marked to a small Israeli settlement. This is the way in which even today the Israelis are in denial about the existence of Palestinians. They try not to mention them in their road signs. They try not to allow motorists to find their way there. Another incident that didn't happen to us, but we had it reported to us by a journalist we know who works in Jerusalem. Went to interview the mayor of one of the settlements right inside the West Bank, and had heard that many of the people living in the settlements were totally oblivious about all the Palestinian villages around them, as though they didn't exist. So he tried it out on the mayor's secretary. He pointed through the window and he said, "Can you tell me the name of that Palestinian village over there?" Expecting her to say, "Well, I don't know the name of the village." She didn't say that. She said, "What village?" Everybody could see the village there. She had just blanked it out of her consciousness. She didn't even see the village. And sadly, that is too true of the Israeli attitude to Palestinians as a whole. They want to be in complete denial about the existence of Palestinians wherever they can. And our defense against that is people like Professor Abu Sitta, who will record the real truth in the atlases that he produces. And that is not just a great academic achievement. Professor Abu Sitta was a professor in Western Ontario and has a distinguished academic career behind him, but it's also a matter, a political statement of the highest order. So, without further ado, I will hand over to Professor Abu Sitta, who's going to do his presentation, which you'll see on the screen. Thank you.
Is it working? Yeah, right. Thank you very much, Mr. Mark Linton, for your kind words.
Chair the meeting, but I know you've not come to hear me. I know you've come to hear Professor Abu Sitta and see his presentation, so I won't stand in the way of his presentation for more than just a couple of minutes. But I just want to say, since this is a big occasion, the launch of the Atlas, the Palestine Atlas, that it's a very, very important moment. On Sunday we will be marking one of the greatest tragedies in our national history. In the first day of the Battle of the Somme, 60,000 British people were killed just between the morning and 1 o'clock. That was a terrible tragedy, and we believe we must never forget that. We make sure we remember it by every Remembrance Sunday. We wear poppies. We played the last post. I'll be playing the last post in my local church on Sunday, and we have 2-minute silence. Well, in just the same way, Palestinians must never forget what happened to their country. And never forgetting means writing down, capturing all the facts, putting them into an atlas. And this is not just of interest to cartographers. This is of interest to every Palestinian, I'm sure, but also to the whole world, because it records an injustice, not a momentary injustice, not a momentary tragedy, but one that was played out over 30 years by the time we got to 1967, and by half a century by the time we got to now. And it's a tragedy that is, of course, still continuing. This book takes us up to, this atlas takes us up to 1966. There is an atlas of the occupation years coming, I'm sure, and I look forward to that as well. But as Professor Abu Sitta says, it is much better recorded now. He's trying to recapture a time when there are few records. My wife and I spent a month in the West Bank this summer, and I just want to mention 2 little incidents from that that I think explain to anyone who doesn't understand why geography is so important in this conflict. One was driving up from Jerusalem.
Also thanks to Palestinian Retail Center and its director, Mr. Majid Azir, for organizing this event at fairly short notice. And thanks to you all for braving the weather on Friday night to come here. That's why I say quality is more important than quantity. You must have read in history books the story of the king who conquered faraway lands and brought back riches, and he immortalized his deeds by carving them on a stone monument. Then the next king came afterwards, and he chipped off his name and put his name instead and claimed to be the victor. This forgery and deception are still going on today, only with more sophisticated means. Now, we don't have stone monuments anymore, but we do have charts and maps. The map is long considered to be the birth certificate of a place. It's also the identity card of its owner. In the last 2 centuries, maps became an instrument of colonial power to show the